Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back so far that even time itself feels like a whisper. We're heading into the world before words, before books, before temples, before anyone thought to carve a god's face into stone. Picture it, a dim prehistoric cave, lit only by flickering firelight and fat-fueled lamps. You're barefoot on cold rock, the air thick with the smell of smoke and damp earth, and somewhere ahead, you hear the low murmur of chanting. You probably won't survive this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I like to think the first spiritual practice began with awe. Just someone looking up at the stars and feeling really, really small. Maybe they thought the moon was watching them, or that a comet was a sign from beyond. Whatever it was, something in early humans made them gather around fire and try to speak to the unseen. In these earliest spiritual gatherings, bones were arranged in circles, feathers laid beside them like fragile prayers, and the walls were painted with ochre-red handprints, each one a signature, or maybe a plea. It wasn't all serious, though. Some archaeologists suggest these early rites might have included dancing, humming, and even some trippy herbal mixtures. Picture a bunch of fur-clad cave folk swaying around a fire after snacking on questionable mushrooms. Spiritual ecstasy, Stone Age edition. The cave of El Castillo in Spain, for example, contains red disc paintings believed to be over 40,000 years old. Older than the idea of agriculture, older than metal, older than any god we have a name for. And yet, someone stood in that cave, breath clouding in the chill, and said, "This spot, right here, this is sacred." One fringe theory I came across, historians still argue whether it's totally bonkers or oddly plausible, is that certain cave systems were chosen specifically for their acoustic properties. Some chambers amplify sound eerily, making whispers echo like thunder. Imagine a spiritual leader speaking into the dark, and the cave itself answering back. Magic? Maybe. Clever early science? Also maybe. We also know that death was a big deal. Burials with grave goods, tools, beads, even bits of food, suggest that people believe something happened after dying. Whether it was a journey, a test, or just a long nap with souvenirs, they prepared for it. One child was buried with over 90 carved ivory beads in what's now Russia. Either they were very loved or very feared. Oh, and here's your first little shocker. In some regions, human skulls were painted and kept around like spiritual relics. Not buried, not burned, just placed on a shelf. Maybe it was a way to keep ancestors close. Maybe it was more like, Grandpa's watching, so don't mess up. But spirituality wasn't just about death. There were rituals for the hunt, scratching images of bison into stone before heading out, as if sketching success into the world. There were fertility rites too, statues with exaggerated hips and breasts buried in hearths and fields. Some people think they were prayers for children. Others say they were early dating profiles. One of the most famous of these figurines is the Venus of Willendorf, about 30,000 years old and barely 4 inches tall. She's all curves and no face, carved from limestone and once painted in red ochre. Like blood, like birth, like firelight flickering off ancient skin. Now here's a twist. We've also found evidence of what might be spiritual competition. In some sites, newer cave paintings were drawn over older ones. Was it disrespect? Was it, my God's better than yours? Or maybe just a prehistoric turf war over real estate with good vibes? The truth is, we may never fully understand what these early people believed. But the clues, tiny beads, broken bones, soot-blackened ceilings, hint at a world where everything meant something. Where fire wasn't just warmth, it was spirit. Where caves weren't shelters, but sacred chambers of the soul. And as I sit here, I can almost hear the low hum of a long-ago voice rising from the shadows, mixing with the smoke, asking questions we still haven't answered. By the time people began shaping bricks from clay and stacking them into cities, spirituality had gotten a serious upgrade. Gone were the simple fire circles in caves. Now we had temples, ziggurats, and priests with actual job descriptions. In places like Sumer and Babylon, spiritual practices weren't just whispers in the dark anymore. They were organized, tax-funded, and often terrifyingly detailed. Let me tell you, if you lived in ancient Mesopotamia and wanted to pray, it wasn't just a quick, "Dear God, please fix this." No, you brought bread, oil, incense, a goat, and maybe even your best bronze dish. The gods of the time, like Enlil, Inanna, and Marduk, were picky. They needed constant attention, and in return they might give you rain, crops, or victory in battle. Or they might not. They were moody, immortal roommates sharing the divine flat upstairs. Spiritual practice in this era was steeped in daily life. Each city had its own patron deity, like Nippur with Enlil or Uruk with Inanna. And temples weren't just quiet places for reflection. They were busy, loud, full of workers, animals, and scribes recording every offering on clay tablets. I imagine it smelled like goat, sweat, and crushed flowers. Fun detail, in some rituals, priests would feed the gods by placing real meals on altars. Afterwards, those meals were often eaten by temple staff. It's a spiritual buffet with some divine loopholes. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more symbolic or if people truly believed the gods consumed essence or energy from food. Either way, someone definitely ate that barley stew. Meanwhile, over in Egypt, spirituality was just as elaborate, but maybe a little more elegant. The Egyptians believed that every part of existence had a spiritual twin, your Ka, vital essence, your Be, your personality bird, and your Akhecho, your glorified, enlightened self. It was like a metaphysical Russian nesting doll. You've probably seen those ornate burial mass or golden sarcophagi, but what you might not know is how intense the spiritual prep for death really was. The Book of the Dead wasn't just a text, it was a literal survival guide for the afterlife. Step 1, avoid being eaten by a crocodile-headed demon named Ammit. Step 2, make sure your heart doesn't weigh more than a feather when judged by Ma'at. Step 3, if you pass, enjoy eternity with all-you-can-eat figs and your favorite pet cat. Egyptian priests also performed daily rituals inside temple sanctuaries, washing statues of gods, dressing them, anointing them with oils. Some of the statues were even designed with tiny mouths so they could spiritually breathe in offerings. It's equal parts adorable and eerie. Oh, and here's your mild shocker of the section. Sometimes when pharaohs or high priests died, they were buried with tiny servant figurines called ushabtis. These weren't just decorative. They were believed to come to life in the afterlife to do chores on your behalf. Laundry, fieldwork, even accounting. A spiritual intern army, frozen in blue glaze. Back in Mesopotamia, omens ruled the spiritual calendar. Priests would read the future in everything from bird patterns to the livers of sacrificed sheep. Yes, you heard that right. Liver reading. Special clay models of animal organs were used as training tools. Somewhere out there was a very serious student whispering, "Ah yes, the left lobe is slightly raised, an omen of war." One particularly quirky practice involved clay figurines called apotropaic demons, placed beneath homes to ward off evil. These little guys had wild faces, some part lion, part scorpion, sometimes with wings, and were believed to growl silently at bad spirits under your floorboards. If only modern home security systems were that stylish. But spirituality wasn't just for kings and priests. Ordinary people had their own household gods, small statues or charms tucked in corners, kissed or anointed during rituals. In Egypt, the household goddess Bes was especially popular. He was short, funny-looking, and protected families from bad dreams. Basically, the ancient version of a spiritual nightlight. And still, beneath all this grandeur, the same core remained: fear, wonder, gratitude. Whether it was pouring wine for Inanna or whispering to Osiris before sleep, people wanted the same things we do now: safety, meaning, a sense that someone, somewhere, was listening. It's comforting, really. The idea that even thousands of years ago, someone might have looked at a storm and said, "Please, just let my roof stay on." And so, in these clay and gold civilizations, spirituality became structure, woven into the very bricks of society. But remember, the gods weren't always benevolent. In the wrong mood, they brought famine, plague, or floods. It was a relationship built on respect, rituals, and sometimes raw goat liver. Confucianism added structure to the spiritual soup. Less mystical, more ethical. Respect, duty, and harmonious relationships became spiritual virtues. It wasn't about escaping the world, but improving it. Even daily chores, when done mindfully, could be a kind of devotion. But don't worry, it wasn't all serenity and sweet lotus blossoms. In both India and China, spiritual rituals sometimes involved bloodletting, fire walking, or elaborate fasting that made your stomach sound like a drum solo. Being holy wasn't always comfortable. Shock moment? In certain ancient Indian rituals called Ashvamedha Yajna, a horse was allowed to wander freely for a year as a symbol of kingship. At the end, well, let's just say the ceremony didn't go well for the horse. Spirituality and politics forever tangled. Somewhere along the winding, incense-scented road from Mesopotamia to the east, spirituality took a turn, from bargaining with gods to seeking inner harmony. The fire and feathers of ancient rituals gave way to geometry, breathing, and silence so deep it could fold time. Tonight, I wander into the temples and forests of ancient India and China, where spiritual practice became both science and symphony. Let's start in the Indus Valley, one of the world's oldest urban civilizations. Though the script they use still hasn't been fully deciphered, historians still argue whether it was even a language or just elaborate doodles. We've uncovered seals that seem to depict a meditating figure. Some scholars believe this might be an early form of Shiva, sitting cross-legged, surrounded by animals. Peaceful, powerful, probably a little stiff after all that sitting. As the Vedic era dawned, spirituality in India bloomed into something vast. The Vedas, those ancient Sanskrit hymns, weren't just chanted, they were cosmic maps. They spoke of sacred sound, Om, cosmic order, Irtio, and fire sacrifices so elaborate they required dozens of priests and precise geometry. You didn't just wing a ritual, you calculated it, down to the shape of your altar bricks. One fringe tidbit? Some ancient Indian texts describe yogis living for hundreds of years by mastering breath alone. A man so still, birds nested in his hair. Was it metaphor? Or were ancient yogis the original sleep influencers? The Upanishads followed, pulling attention inward. Spirituality became self-discovery, and questions like, who am I? Or what is the self? Took center stage. According to them, the soul, Atman, and the universe, Brahman, weren't just connected, they were the same, which is both inspiring and mildly terrifying if you've had a bad day. And then there was yoga, not the stretchy pants, goat on your back kind. The ancient yogic system was serious spiritual business. Breath control, pranayama, posture, asana, sense withdrawal, pratyahara, all leading to samadhi, the blissful union with the universe. Think enlightenment with better back support. Slide east and we find ourselves in ancient China, where spirituality flowed like a river. Literally, the Tao, isn't something you worship. It's something you align with. Like tuning your life to the frequency of a mountain stream. You don't conquer nature, you flow with it. Taoist spiritual practice wasn't about loud prayers or gold-covered altars. It was about stillness, reflection, watching clouds drift and understanding that nothing rushed could ever be truly wise. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Laozi, reads like a cosmic lullaby, full of paradoxes that somehow make perfect sense when whispered at night. Here's a curious quirk. Some Taoist monks believed in a kind of spiritual immortality. Not by living forever in this body, but by refining inner energy, qi, to become a kind of spirit being, light enough to ride mist. They practiced breath retention, visualization, and something called internal alchemy, which sounds like either enlightenment or the most peaceful science experiment ever. Meanwhile, sacred symbols began to bloom, mandalas with their intricate geometric patterns representing the cosmos, the yin and yang dancing in eternal balance. These images weren't just pretty, they were maps for meditation. Staring into them was like gazing into the structure of existence. Even the elements were spiritual: earth, water, fire, air, ether. Each had a mood, a rhythm, a kind of spiritual fingerprint. In Taoism, you didn't just meditate, you aligned your body with the elements, the seasons, even specific organs? Yes, your spleen had a spiritual personality. Poor spleen, always overlooked. And yet in all this precision, in the chants, the charts, the breath, there was a soft kind of beauty. A realization that the universe wasn't just out there, but inside too. The idea that the divine might be hiding in your ribcage, waiting for you to sit still long enough to notice. I imagine an old sage, white beard like mist, sitting under a banyan tree. A student asks, "Master, how do I find God?" And the sage, eyes twinkling, says, "Breathe, then keep breathing." By now we've wandered through the caves and temples of Asia, but across oceans and deserts, other spiritual fires were burning just as brightly, only louder, wilder, and sometimes a bit bloodier. Tonight we're stepping into the world of masks, drumming, sacred dances, and the kinds of ceremonies that make your modern brain go, "Wait, they did what?" Let's start in the Americas. Long before European ships loomed on the horizon, civilizations like the Aztecs, Maya, and Inca built entire worlds steeped in spiritual meaning. Their temples touched the sky, and every stone felt placed with purpose, each one humming with belief. Among the Maya, the cosmos wasn't just out there. It was a living being. They believed in a layered universe, the heavens above, the human world in the middle, and the underworld below, called Xibalba, a place filled with trials, darkness, and, oddly enough, a ballgame. Yes, one of their sacred stories involves underworld gods who challenged twin heroes to a game, which in true ancient fashion may have ended with decapitation. The Maya also practiced bloodletting, not for drama, but as a sacred offering. Rulers would pierce their tongues or earlobes with stingray spines, offering drops of blood to their gods. Spiritual currency, if you will. Shocked? You should be. But to them, blood was the most precious gift, the bridge between mortals and the divine. In the Andes, the Inca spoke to spirits called apus, sacred mountain beings. They believed these towering peaks were alive, watching over them, breathing snow and whispering through the wind. Offerings were made high in the mountains, often in freezing silence. Sometimes, tragically, these included children chosen as messengers to the gods. Their bodies, preserved in ice, have been found atop volcanoes, tiny sleeping souls frozen in sacred time. Meanwhile, in the vast plains and forests of North America, native spiritual practices were as diverse as the land itself. Many tribes believed in a great spirit, an unseen force connecting all life. Rituals involved dance, chant, sweat lodges, and vision quests, journeys of isolation and fasting to seek spiritual insight. One mainstream historical fact here: the sun dance, performed by plains tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne, was one of the most important ceremonies. It involved days of dancing, piercing, and prayer. The goal? Communal renewal. Personal sacrifice, a reaffirmation that life, pain, and spirit are interwoven. Let's drift to Africa now, where spiritual practice beats like a drum beneath everything. In many traditional African belief systems, the boundary between the living and the dead was as thin as smoke. Ancestors weren't gone. They were present, powerful, and often called upon for guidance or protection. Rituals here were rich in rhythm. Drums weren't just instruments, so they were voices. Certain beats summoned spirits. Others warded them off. And when the time came to speak to the divine, people danced. They danced until the air shimmered, until they weren't themselves anymore. Possession by spirits wasn't feared. It was invited, celebrated. A moment when the human and the holy became one. One quirky tidbit: in the Yoruba tradition, there are hundreds of deities called Orisha, each with their own likes, dislikes, colors, songs, and even preferred foods. Some love palm wine, others prefer bananas. Honestly, it's like catering a divine party with a very complicated guest list. Masks were central across many African and Native American traditions, but these weren't party props. They were portals. When someone put on a sacred mask, they didn't just look like a spirit. They became the spirit. The wood, paint, and feathers turned into skin, fur, and divine identity. The audience didn't say, "Oh, that's Jim in a mask." They said, "That is the god." And historians still argue whether some of these mask performances were used not just for ritual, but also to pass down coded knowledge, history, astronomy, even medicine, hidden in dance steps and drum beats. Let's not forget the role of shamans, those mysterious figures who walk between worlds. Every culture had some version. They were healers, prophets, negotiators between spirit and man, often chosen by birth, vision, or occasionally a traumatic illness. Shamans were both revered and feared. You didn't just pop in to say hello. You brought tobacco, you waited respectfully, and you never touched their rattles without permission. And sometimes their methods were unconventional. In some Amazonian tribes, shamans used a brew called ayahuasca, a powerful psychedelic potion made from vines and leaves. Under its influence, they claimed to speak with forest spirits, heal illnesses, and even locate lost objects. Where are my sandals? Let me drink this vine and ask the spirit of the river. Across all these cultures, distant yet uncannily alike, spirituality was performance, practice, and presence. It was painted on walls, sung into fire, whispered into trees. It wasn't always peaceful, and it definitely wasn't always pretty, but it was deeply human. And as I close my eyes, I picture a fire-lit circle, painted faces, drums pulsing like a second heart, feet stamping dust into sacred patterns. A child watching from the edge, wide-eyed, breathing in the oldest story of all, that we are not alone, that the world is alive, and that the spirit walks with us, even now. There's something haunting about forgotten things. Not just the ancient temples swallowed by jungle or bones buried beneath desert sands, but the rituals, beliefs, and songs that once lit the souls of entire civilizations and now live only in fragments, half remembered or lost entirely. Tonight, I walk through the ruins of spiritual worlds that once thrived, now just echoes on the wind. Let's talk about Atlantis. Not the cheesy underwater city from cartoons, but the myth that's been tugging at human imagination for over 2,000 years. Plato described it as a powerful, advanced civilization that vanished in a single day and night of misfortune. Historians still argue whether he meant it literally or as an allegory for hubris. Either way, believers say Atlantis was rich in spiritual knowledge, crystals that stored energy, levitating temples, and a deep understanding of cosmic forces. Some fringe thinkers even claim Atlanteans could communicate telepathically, draw energy from the Earth's core, and manipulate time through ritual. Sounds far-fetched? Sure. But sometimes the boundary between faith and fiction is just a matter of belief and really convincing storytelling. From there, we drift to ancient priesthoods, groups who guarded sacred knowledge like dragons hoarding treasure. Think of the Druids in ancient Celtic lands. They left no written records, only whispers through Roman accounts and myths. But what we do know is they were keepers of natural wisdom, studying stars, forests, and the flow of time. Some rituals involved oak trees, mistletoe, and possibly human sacrifice. We'll let that part stay buried, thank you. Egypt had its own priestly caste, trained from youth to memorize hundreds of sacred texts and conduct ceremonies with such precision that one wrong incense stick could offend the gods. It's like being a barista for the divine, except if you mess up, crops fail, and the Nile floods your pantry. In Mesoamerica, entire cities were built in cosmic alignment. The Pyramid of Chichen Itza, for example, casts a shadow that looks like a serpent slithering down the steps during the equinox. Was it showmanship? Science? A spiritual message carved into architecture? Maybe all three. And buried beneath many of these sites, literally, are the graves of spiritual figures whose names we'll never know. In Turkey at Göbekli Tepe, a 12,000-year-old temple predates writing, farming, even pottery. Massive carved stones arranged in circles, each with animals and abstract symbols. No homes nearby, no signs of daily life, just worship. This place wasn't built for survival, it was built for spirit. Here's your light shocker. Some researchers believe Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried on purpose after centuries of use. Why? Were they hiding something? Moving on to a new phase? Or was it part of a ritual cycle we simply can't comprehend? Spiritual knowledge wasn't just about gods. It was about stars, numbers, seasons. The Dogon people of Mali, for example, had detailed astronomical knowledge of the Sirius star system, long before modern telescopes. Historians still debate how they knew. Oral tradition, ancient contact, or just a cosmic coincidence? Even in places where religions changed, conquered, rewritten, rebranded, traces of the old ways remain. A Christian chapel built over a pagan altar, a Muslim mosque preserving the foundation stones of earlier beliefs, a Buddhist stupa shaped like a mountain that once hosted animist rites. Layer upon layer of sacred dust. Symbols survive when words vanish, spirals etched into stone, the eye motif staring from temple walls. The recurring triangle, circle, serpent. These shapes echo across continents as if humanity once shared a common dream. One last curious tidbit: in remote parts of the Himalayas, monks practice sky burial, offering the body of the dead to vultures, returning it directly to the sky. To them, it's not morbid, it's sacred, a final act of generosity, a literal ascension. And perhaps that's the quiet truth running through every ancient spiritual practice we've explored. A desire to lift up, to rise beyond flesh and fear, to become something more. I picture a candle flickering in a dark temple, a voice chanting in a language no one speaks anymore, the scent of burnt herbs, the brush of fabric, a hand reaching upward, not for power, but for peace. Because in the end, whether it was blood on stone, breath drawn slow, or feathers laid in a perfect circle, the goal was always the same: to make sense of the mystery, to feel part of the vastness, to say to the universe, "I see you," and maybe, just maybe, it answered back. Now that our journey through the shadows of ancient spiritual practices slip away and let the silence hold you. You've made the journey. Now let go.